In this video, we're going to take this initial processed point cloud that we've generated and start looking at it and see if we can get rid of some data and use some of our other tools to do that. So I'm going to turn off my photos, but I'm going to keep the flight lines on for a moment. So this is a good opportunity to go through the some of the user interface tools. Notice up here is the amount of points that it is showing you on your screen, so it's only 2% of the total. If I scroll in and it refreshes, I am now at 100% of the total, 33%. So depending on your zoom level is how much is displaying, and that's just so it's not trying to render millions of points at the same time, and it is a performance issue. If you come to a point where you want to have 100% shown, and we'll do this later in some future steps, this but white triangle will force 100% display. Over here are your display options for how you view the point cloud. The active LAS that you have chosen, we only have one now. As we do our tutorials, you'll see more, is what you are playing with. So in here you have by elevation, color banding. You could do RGB, which we haven't colorized yet, and you'll see that by classification and so forth. Or we can do by elevation. This changes it from points to tens and so forth. So if I switch it to 10 view, it makes a quick rendering of the 10, of what it says is a 10, and all of the points. Now pay attention to how noisy this is. You see how bumpy and noisy it is? You'll see the difference once we get through with our processing. And this is all the points. Over here are your filters. So if you hit the filter icon, these are all of the points in your system and your classifications. I'm going to hit scan just so we can see. So we have 10 million points in this point cloud. You may have 50, 60, 200 million. But in this small data set, we've got 10 million. Let's remember that number of 10 million. But in here is how you could turn off classifications, and we'll be using this later. So now with all that being said, let's look at our data. Now remember that when we ran Geocode, we turned the clip range off. And why did we do that? So if you come over on the right are your profile tools. I'm going to click open a profile window, make it a little bigger so we can see more, and then I'm going to hit this button right here to draw a profile line, and I'm going to draw it by click and then left click somewhere else or double click somewhere else to end my profile line, and I'm going to put it along this flight line. So in here you can see all of the data and all of the point clouds that you have. And these are very small, so I'm going to go up here to my filter and I'm going to change these to about a 3, and it makes them pop a little bit more and close, so a little bit thicker. In the profile window, left click and drag up is zoom out, left click and drag down is zoom in, right click and drag is to move. Now notice up here this white line moving. And the same thing when I zoom in, it gets out, it gets bigger, and when I zoom in, it gets smaller. So it's letting you see where you are. If I use my scroller wheel, the profile line moves. The sample that I am doing now. When you did this profile, you want to keep it very small, as thin as possible, because we're doing for this process. So I'm just going to act like I'm making a new one. And you see how I'm making the thickness. If I right click, it's going to ask me the depth. I'm just going to say 2 feet. Okay. Now I'm do all that to show you this. So if I do that and I zoom out, you see these points up here. This is that flight line. This is noise, Lidar noise. So what I want to know is how far is generally my ground from my flight line, and how to the top of all of the data and to the bottom of all the data. So let's come over here and click the measure icon, and I'm going to click somewhere around the flat line and come down, pull down, and right here you'll see the distance. So around 190 feet. So nothing from the flat line to 190 feet down do I care about. So I'm going to make a note of that. And conversely, I'm going to go down to somewhere that's just below my ground. So 250, and I'm going to round up. So I'm going to create this band. So between 190 and 250 I like. Anything outside of, get rid of. It's what we're fixing to do. But before I make all those decisions, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to cut it in a different direction just to check. And whoops, let's click my zoom icon here so I can zoom out. And I could barely see it. That flat line was there for half a second, but it's disappearing. It's generally flat. If you have a lot of topography, you're going to want to do it in a direction along your topography so that you can see the rise and fall of the data, so that you don't accidentally take out good ground data. So there's this again, that purple dot is my flat line. So generally still around a 190-ish, and then still around 250-ish. So okay, so now that I've got that written, I'm going to close my profile window here to make that go away, and we're going to re-geocode and get rid of some of that high noise and low noise is what we call it. So we're going to geocode again. This time we're going to enable the clip range, and I'm going to put 190 and 250. Now we said 190. I am going to intentionally put a number in here that's wrong so you can see what happens. So I'm going to put 230 in geocode and give it a moment to geocode. Now that it's done processing, look how wildly different it looks. I've took some chunks out of these buildings. They're not there because I intentionally made that envelope dig down into them. So if you want to see all of the data, which typically you want to at least see your relevant information, make sure you have that. But if you make an erroneous assumptions and you start having holes or gaps, if you have multiple flat lines, it's because you've put the clipping pane wrong. So I'm going to change this back to 190, and I'm going to geocode again. So now that I've done that, let's just take a quick look. And let's do 10 foot, why not? And let's come back right here and zoom out. There's my flat lines. Remember that noise we had up here at the top? Space dust, as I like to call it, it's now gone. So it's just less data we have to worry about processing out. So you want to get all that out now as much as you can. So now that I've done that, I'm going to close that profile. Now note that I said when we were geocoding we turned the colorized point cloud off. This can be time consuming. So because we were doing an iterative process of clipping, we didn't want to have that. And now that we know that what we've got is good, we're going to come right here to this button and colorize the point cloud as a second step rather than one. And we're just going to hit colorize point cloud. This, depending on the size of your project, can take quite a while, and it is intensive on the machine. So let it start running and let it get done. And now that it is colorized, you can see the RGB values. Whoops. For the individual point cloud data, and I've got it on 10 still, as you remember, so you can see this. So now I can flip between elevation banding, or RGB, which can be helpful for our next steps. And that's it for this video. We'll move on and start classifying data in our next one.